I've been an object of an internet attack, an article that was written about my capacity as a mayor, capacity as a pastor. The article is not who or what I am.
The New York Post followed up on this particular story, and I welcome you tonight to the Exceptional Conservative Show live from the nation's capital. We certainly are not ashamed at all of the good news conservatism, for it is the power of liberation, first to the Republican and then to the tyrant. And if you understood where that particular motto came from, Romans chapter 1, you would understand why this is a very important story for two men tonight. Yours truly, and also a man who is a pioneer who has been fighting fearlessly to protect women and children. None other than my very good friend, Johnuler. John, it is a tremendous honor to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, but this is not a topic that we relish.
No, and amazingly, John, you would think that after maybe one or two of these shows, we wouldn't have to do the shows anymore. But literally, we were right about the Penn State swimmer. We were right about the clothes snatcher.
Sam Brinton.
Exactly.
Right. Leah Thomas, the deviant swimmer. That's
exactly. Right. Absolutely right about these particular individuals. This is not, and many people will bring up Carl Jung and Freud, Sigmund Freud, psychologists, psychiatrists. They don't think homosexuality and this particular thing that both of us assure you is a deviancy. It's truly a deviancy. It's just a formality that we have to learn to affirm. I want to give you the opportunity tonight. Bubba Copeland, mayor, pastor, father of three. How could he possibly have hidden this for decades?
A good question. Right. We don't know how far back this goes, or people may have found out. I want to mention, first of all, a site that really has done a good job in a very quick way. It's called Redux. Let me see. It's RED. Yeah, how do my apologies, Genevieve.
No problem.
Genevieve Luck. REDUXX.com. They do an outstanding job of highlighting male deviance, and especially when it comes to the trans deception. So there is a breaking story, or they've covered this. Sorry.
Yeah. And we put that in our chat room. Thanks to you, we put that in our chat room tonight. That breaking story, which
and it's really important because that's right. The title of it is "Trans Activists Mourn Alabama Mayor Who Committed Suicide After Being Outed as a Cross-Dresser Who Fantasized About Murdering Women." So, and Jennifer Anna Slatz, who actually interviewed me about the dangers of the trans movement and furries, quite frankly, and does a tremendous job. She and Genevieve Gluck. Now, there are certain things where we couldn't be further apart politically, and I try to just keep my focus on social media and other venues to things that pertain to the protection of women and children. So on that, we all should be able to agree. And isn't it sad, in my estimation, that the feminists and what they may call the third wave feminists or what have you, radical feminists, but they're the ones, quite frankly, that are doing the job of what the church should be doing as far as unmasking the dangers of all this. So we had a man, and it's a tragedy, this thing. We had a man who was not only mayor, but was serving as a pastor. And I listened to enough of his own videotapes or interviews of him, and I was able to derive a few things. One, he is married. How long he's been married, I don't know. Because he joked about people used to ask him how long until he gets married. But he also referenced he has a teen son in high school. So he may have been remarried, which is fine. But the real victims in all this, the real tragedy is his wife or his kids and his congregation. So he had been involved in a Baptist church, and that matters, right? He could have been involved in a United Methodist or Presbyterian church, or those that claim, harmony with the alternative lifestyles or the trans stuff. That's still bad enough.
Yeah. But
go to a church that this goes against all belief system, all orders of conduct, that he held a secret life. We call that hypocrisy. So it really matters. Yet this, the media wants to spin this. A gal on Yahoo News spun it the same thing. They want to make a martyr out of this guy. No, this guy was a self-centered, porn-accessing, deviant man who was as hypocritical as the day goes long. I still, part of me wants to have sympathy for him. Nobody wants to see a guy end up killing himself. But I work with, on a weekly basis, sex offenders, and no sex offender started out being a sex offender without pornography since the 1980s. So just as I challenge men who have crossed the line, that they need to go back and begin to address their porn use. That is not out of being a victim.
Yeah, and this is not the first time you've come on the air with me to talk about a mayor who has been outed. You came
That's
on.
Right. The guy that was friends with Buttigieg.
Yeah, friends with Buttigieg, who literally, oh my God, they had truckloads of stuff coming out from child pornography from this guy.
That's right.
We talked about the gentleman from the Department of Energy.
Sam Britton. Guy. Unbelievable.
And all of these guys seem to be able to operate with normalcy. They seem to be normal. And that's where we get people who say, this lifestyle, there's nothing wrong with it. It's normal, just like being heterosexual. Now, I'm a Romans 1 guy, and I don't affirm that, don't believe that. But please, convince me otherwise.
That's right. And we should be Romans 12 guys. And Romans 12, verses 1 and 2 simply says this: to those that claim to be Christians. And my guess is a pastor of a Baptist church is going to claim to be a Christian.
So
this applies. It says, present your bodies as holy, right? In a holy manner. That means set apart. Now, you don't have to be a pastor, right? He was a small business guy. He owned real estate, and he was a mayor. He didn't have to be involved in the ministry, number one. It raises significant questions. He himself, and I don't know when the interview was aired or was taped, probably just recently, but at that time,
it was a year ago.
Okay, that he had been involved in ministry, working with youth, working with teens for about 19 or 20 years. That raises significant concerns. Why? Because deviance isn't contained, right? Eventually, if a guy is deviant, he's going to start to influence others. And so it raises huge concerns why he was involved with the youth. My recommendation, if there are any listeners that were, there's no other way to put it, that were perped on or groomed by this man, they need to come forward for a couple of reasons. They need to come forward for their own empowerment and take their voice back, because victims, survivors need to speak, and they also need to get healing. And the first step, a significant step, is being able to say what that person did was wrong. And this guy, according to Redux, and I also want to read, there was an exclamation, if I might. Carrie Smith on Twitter, she and I have kind of followed one another. And if anybody wants, nobody did it better than Carrie. And she said she was going to be listening to Kudos. So it's called Deprogrammed, her own site. And she can be seen at real. So at the the at sign, Real Carrie, that's Keri Smith, Real Carrie Smith on Twitter. Let me read what she wrote. She did a great summary. She said, this porn-addicted pastor and mayor lived a double life, writing murder porn about killing a woman in his own town and taking over her identity. This was part of a XXX rated story he wrote several times. He dressed in women's clothes or clothing, posted explicit photos of himself online, talked about becoming a whore, a bimbo, like a dog in a feminized receptacle for men. He shared images of gender erotica sites with pictures of minors centered around them transitioning into girls. He was a fetishist, a hypocrite, and a pervert, all while preaching from the pulpit every Sunday and deceiving his flock instead of stepping down and getting the help he so desperately needed. Instead of humbling himself, she's spot on, okay. Instead of humbling himself, he arrogantly carried out wickedness and thinking he's smarter than the congregation and smarter than God. When news broke of his double public life, because the profiles and porn he was publishing was all public, on November 1st, he gave this defiant, arrogant sermon, and that sermon, now I've posted that on my site, on my Twitter page. It sounds like, and you were just playing some of it, it sounds like Bill Clinton, absolutely defiant, right? The right-wing conspiracy against him. And she goes on, in which he says nothing in his life will change, and he has nothing to be ashamed of. She continues, that ego and shame led him to take his life 2 days later. And now the media wants us to lionize this deceiver, this pervert, this hypocrite, and blame the tragic loss of his life and destruction of his wife and kids. And that's spot on. They are the real victims along with the congregation. And the destruction to his congregation and his community on, you guessed it, transphobia and the right. No, as she continues, his sexual orientation was pervert. You're not going to put him on gay people or trans people. Again, a little bit, we might differ with that, but as far as you're not going to put it anywhere else. Writing murder porn, fetishizing transitioning young boys, here's the concern, reducing femininity to becoming a whore and a receptacle and a dog is not gay or trans, it's sick and perverted. Stop selling us sickness or orientation. Stop excusing the behaviors of groomers, fetishists, and predators by calling it their identity. This man was eaten up by shame because his degrading and disgraceful double life became public knowledge. The dark pit he was inhabiting wasn't any less degrading or disgraceful back when he thought he could keep it separate. His congregation deserves to know. His constituents deserve to know. Sickness and shame in a society that papers over sickness and shame and calls it normal and identity is what led to this man's death. And Carrie, well done.
There you go.
She summed it up.
Yeah.
Absolutely summed it up.
This, first, you and I talk on this particularly. You know where I feel on this, and it was far better for him to take his life than to admit to me personally what he was doing with boys. Mental illness untreated. Alabama mayor and pastor becomes LGBTQ plus martyr. Is how I promoted this particular show tonight. I mean, he checked all the boxes. He was Christian. He was conservative. Yeah, a picture with Donald Trump. I mean, he checked all the boxes. How did he get away? Is this psychotic? How does someone meld a reprobate mind into an environment like a church?
There you go. Well, for those of us that are Christians, for those of us that have been part of the church, if you're familiar with the New Testament, hopefully you are, if you go to church, right? If the pastor's been doing his job, is 2 Peter chapter 2. I would recommend read that. Okay, 2,000 years old, Peter, remember the one that denied the Lord? He talked about how there will be fraudulent individuals that get into positions of leadership and will help themselves to the cash and to the women. He doesn't talk about kids, because he assumed people would be able to spot that. Well, we've become so dumbed down in terms of our discernment, right? Because unfortunately, the church growth stuff that's been pumped out there, pastors, unfortunately, are more concerned now about numeric growth rather than growing deep roots into people. So we've got a lot of fragile people out there that are in church, and they're as stable as small little plants in sand. They don't have deep roots. And so they've got all these issues going on. Why? Because they are either false converts. Somebody led them to believe that they're in when they're not. So that's a danger. But you have a lack of discernment. So people who sound good, where's my Bible? I've got my Bible somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In this day and age, about Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen is a fraud. People need to understand that, right? If somebody asks Joel Osteen, like Larry King used to, is there help? Well, Larry, I just don't know. Anybody go through? I just don't know. What do you mean you don't know? His dad was a pastor. Larry, if there is no hell, then there's no need for a savior, right? You can't be saved from anything.
I suppose it depends on what prayer line you're in. If it's a free prayer line, there's a hell.
Yeah. But Ken, so to answer your question, what we're talking about, and people need to understand this, that deviance, and this comes from my work, 15 years clinical work, working with men who've offended. Deviance is the process of becoming twisted in mind and soul. Where what used to be right, wrong, good, bad becomes inverted. And therefore, the brain still has the gray matter, white matter. IQ points are all the same, but what goes on in the mind and what goes on in the mind, therefore, goes on in the heart. The affections, the appetites, the motives, what drives someone, what energizes someone, now is very different. Those of us that are Christians, we've heard the term, the mind of Christ. Let this mind be in you. What is that? That is a reformed mind. What is that? That is now a mind that can think God's thoughts, that can a mind that can trigger God's feelings within us. So now we have empathy when we may not have had empathy before. We now, as a matter of fact, we didn't have empathy for the right reasons. Right? Now we have a conscience that is active. Now we have a desire to do the right thing because it is the right thing, not because of the benefit we will get, not because of the voters who will vote for us. So a reprobate mind is one that has become the polar opposite. And reprobate, people need to understand this, it's a metallurgy term. People think that the New Testament is a religious book. Well, we could say it's religious, but it has important concepts. So Paul used a non-religious term to describe what happens to a man's mind, a human being's mind, but a man's mind when it is given over to self. And it ends up becoming the polar opposite in terms of what is driving and motivating and energizing a man. So if a man is given over to self, to selfishness, to ego, he will end up with a value system and characteristics that are the polar opposite of God. And here's where psychopathy comes in. And the modern day term psychopathy is the old-fashioned 3,000-year-old term that's found in the book of Proverbs and Psalms, a fool.
Yes.
Do a word study, look through Proverbs, look through Psalms, look whenever it says fool, and put in the word white-collar psychopath. And you will see, especially in Proverbs chapter 6, look what energizes them. The very first description of that person is a liar. They become excellent liars. Hypocrites.
Can we put a pin there? Can we put a pin? Because I think you hit on the essence that many women will say, I forgive him. It's all right. He'll get better. if you are sincere, seared in mind, and are good at lying, like a lawyer,
or a politician, all right?
Oh, politician.
Wall Street,
Exactly.
Wall Street, right? Robert Hare referenced Wall Street, and
Exactly.
where he's a psychopath. Mm-hmm.
If you own an island and you got kids and Supreme Court justices coming, if you're that gone, is there hope for you? When the term reprobate is used, is there hope? Do we get into a prayer circle and it just comes out of you? Are you that sincere as a liar? And if you are that sincere as a liar, do you even want help?
There we go. I refer people back to the passage. Let God describe what happens. It says 3 times, God gave them over. The term to give over is a legal term, or courtroom setting.
Yep.
We see the sheriffs in there in the courtroom. The gavel goes down, sentence is passed, and the person is pronounced guilty. What do the sheriffs or the police officers or law enforcement, what do they do? As soon as the person's pronounced guilty, the law enforcement officers stand up, handcuff the person, and lead them away. The term given over is that dynamic, that the person is given over repeatedly, and they're going lower and lower. They're given over to self. And there's a point at which, based upon that description that Paul wrote under the inspiration of God, he wanted to get a message across. And this is the message I try to get across to the men in my sex offender treatment groups. I have 4 groups every week. And I continue to try to instill the fear of God in them. Why? And how do you do that? You let the book speak. We reference the book of Proverbs quite often. Why? Because it's the book of wisdom. If only Solomon had taken his own advice, right? He wouldn't have ended up train wreck.
It's good to give it to your kids.
Right, but it talks about the importance of walking in wisdom, which is the polar opposite. But it also talks about the fool. And when somebody crosses a line and a line and a line with their conscience, they will. And you can get to a point where your conscience doesn't work anymore because you've been given over to yourself. God lets you go. And if you, especially guys, but this is true for women too. Think about Mother Gothel, Legally Tangled, right? Right. So this is equal opportunity. But the human heart, if left to itself, it will place self on the throne. Ego grows like a snowball, and you get to a point where you've overridden your conscience enough and ego grows enough, you don't ever want to be any other way than what you are, and you want to double down on it. That's why there's no desire to be any other way than what you are. From a human perspective, you lose the desire to ever be any other way, and you think it's stupid. There's a pejorative term that the inmates, when I was working in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections on psych staff, they would use this term. It was sort of a fun little term of derision. They would say, Euler, you're such a Boy Scout.
Yep.
Right? Think about that. I still actually remember that. I didn't get very far in Boy Scouts. I didn't like to lay on pine cones and things on these campouts. But trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Wouldn't you hate, if you're in prison, wouldn't you hate to have a cellie like that?
Wow.
Where he didn't steal from you. He was actually neat, didn't pee on the toilet seat and all that. Okay. So they'll mock that, but they'll like that. They like the fact that the women they date and they manipulate are like that. They like the fact that they have grandmothers and mothers and aunts that bail them out that are like that, but they wouldn't want to be like that, but they know where to find them. Where do you find all the people that have that are striving for spirituality, but unfortunately been taught that it's spiritual to be nice? For the audience, I want to tell you, it's not spiritual to be nice. It doesn't mean being mean and nasty, but you won't find nice in the fruit of the Spirit. We have to be discerning. Why? Because these individuals, these wolves in sheep's clothing, look for easy prey, easy pickings. And it didn't surprise me that this guy had a business school background. He sold real estate. He ran for political office. Oh, and he also was a pastor. His congregation lacked the discernment to see that this guy was fast talking. And his wife or kids may be listening to this, and my heart breaks for them. They are the victims, even above and beyond the congregation. And the congregation, can you imagine? They're all going to have to go through dealing with their own trauma because they trusted this man.
Yeah.
That's what's so tragic about this. So you have a deviant man, and the more deviant they become, and people need to hear this too, you easily can live a double life. The only time that you can't live a double life is when you're starting to go downhill.
Yep.
But the further you go, the easier it becomes. Look at Judas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? He was Judas' treasurer. They handed him the checkbook all the time.
Yep. And when we're speaking of the days of Christ, Ancient of Days, and we have the great joy of talking with Johnuler this evening to talk people through, because there are a lot of conservatives who are taking what the mainstream media is writing and reporting tonight to heart falsely, and thinking it is your fundamental belief in God that caused this man to break. And that was not it. And John will assure you all in the sense that he was caught. The fact that he was caught was his trauma. That was when he could go no further. And I want to say this in regards to the news reporting on this. New York Post reported accurately what happened to him. He got in his car. He drove 15 miles out of his town. And as he was driving, the police were trying to pull him over. He decided to get out of the car, put his gun where life ends, and kill himself. John, a man who goes on a police chase at the very end of his life wants something that the world can't enough give. What is that, sir?
I think it was desperation.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully this will help with balance. Less people think I'm a firebrand. They already think that. But for those that think that, let me ask you, if you know a sex offender treatment provider, do you want him to be nice and kind or a firebrand? Okay, now, what the men in my group experience is actually a very calm, decent guy, but I'll tell you what, on the inside, guess where I'm going with them? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm making sure that they accept responsibility for what they did. I'm making sure that for public safety purposes, they come clean.
That's the home run. A man who goes on a police chase and attempts to kill himself wants attention, but he doesn't want responsibility. He was not going to give the world the opportunity of taking away his titles, his authority, everything that he had garnered in order to have his double lifestyle.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Ken, and I'm just going to surmise, based upon my years of working with guys who've gotten into deviance. Mm-hmm. And again, first and foremost, if his wife or kids are listening, I want them to know that our heart breaks for you guys.
Yes.
Honestly, I can't even imagine. Their lives are turned upside down. What do? Because of now the truth is coming up. They've lost their dad to suicide. That's bad enough. But now to find out their husband or their dad was into, it's unbelievable.
Exactly.
My hunch is the wife knew.
Yes.
Because this guy would have been porn saturated.
Mm-hmm.
This guy was, as a matter of fact, it really is bad.
Because he's, real quick, he's writing porn.
There we go. Okay. In the Redux, and I want to encourage people to go to Redux, REDUXX.com. Anna Slatz, she interviewed me about furries. You're going to see what I'm seeing right now. It's just unbelievable. But I want to read, they do great investigative work. Okay. Mm-hmm. They found the stories he was writing. Let me read a couple of these. This is just surreal. Here are some titles. This is what this pastor behind the scenes was writing. in a very deviant website. Okay, and he assumed a pseudonym, Brittany Summerlin. Okay, so he's got fake names going on. Mm-hmm. Here's some of the names of the stories, and this one they're all in 2017. The Recruit, a porn story, chapter 2, called The Transition. It's rated XXX. Okay, chapter 2, of our adventure in becoming the next big thing in she-male porn. Here's some of the categories he wrote. Like if you write online, if you do a YouTube video and you do those little tag lines, I'm never good at that. Here's some of the things he put.
Or if you happen to be going to your 6th grade classroom library. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. So here are the categories he put his writings under: bimbo, bizarre body modification, chemical or drug-induced change. This guy was working with kids at his church, by the way, teens.
Yes.
Okay, here it is. Identity death, right? A dead name. Sexual punishment. Slow transformation transitioning. Now we got key words. This is what he put in there. Breast enlargement, breast implants, castration, gay lesbian, hormones, long fingernails, use of sex toys. Okay, then another story. The Recruit, a porn store, or this is chapter 1. Okay, chapter 1 of a young man's dream to make it big into the porn business. Due to his small size, though, he'll have to make it as the next big name in the she-male end of the business. Here's another one. Becoming Christine. This is freakish. It's not freakish. I headed up a standalone specialized forensic sex offender treatment unit for sexually violent predators. Pennsylvania had 2 at the time, the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. This is really concerning stuff. He says this: Becoming Christine, the story of a friend of mine, Mr. Imposter, Mr. Imposter and myself put this together. It's the story of a young man who falls in love with his friend, knowing he will never accept him as a gay guy. He makes changes to become one of those. Now, dangerous obsession. So here we go. This is rated R.
Wow.
So it says this: I wanted her life. Staring at her on the latest social media application, all I could think of was how amazing it would be to be her, making my mind up. Nothing can stop me from turning myself into a carbon copy of her. And he describes how he murders her.
Wow.
Okay. This kind of stuff is not just porn addiction. Mm-hmm. This is a man that is given over. Think about how much it takes to write anything. You have to think about it.
Exactly.
It's in your mind all the time. This man was watching snuff porn. This guy was looking at bestiality porn because they go in successive order. This guy was looking at furry porn. This guy was looking at detective stuff. This guy was looking at mutilation stuff. And now he's writing about it. And it turns out he was writing about a woman, a real person in his town. Mm-hmm. This is a psychopath. This is a sexual psychopath. And they think about all the sexual psychopaths that we've read about. Yep. They are the white collar ones, the bloody ones. Now, certainly once they're found out, they're bloody. But a white collar psychopath has mastered the art of impression management. But because they've overridden their conscience, they have no empathy and no remorse. This man, and how many more are there out there that are posing as pastors? There were 2 guys in Ohio, 2 friends that claim to be pastors. The head pastors, well, I think he was pastor in Cincinnati, or Cleveland, and his wife was head of Child Protective Services, and they had a child trafficking ring going on. And it come to find out there was graft going on with the city leadership. Of course there was. So what better place to begin to access and to provide plausible deniability, because you're a pastor. So we need to help congregations to be discerning. My very first site, churchprotect.org, is a training site. I recommend people go on there to learn about the truths and the myths of sexual predators. I learned a lot when I was working with the worst of the worst in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections for over 11 years. And so I provide that information there along with my own research that I did.
Yeah. You speak of church support. Now, you know I'm a firebrand when it comes to churches. And I give holy hell, especially when they've turned over their power to the state. But how long is it before you recognize the signs that someone is sitting in their basement writing murderous porn? And it could be the person he's attempting to emulate is someone in his own church. And how long before the deviant becomes so far removed that he becomes a murderer, like the military officer from Canada who was stealing women's underwear from luggages?
That's right. And there was a question in there. Sorry, but you mean how long?
Yeah.
Really? What are we talking about?
How,
good question.
How long?
When a guy when a guy starts writing that kind of stuff, he's really dangerous. The first is stealing women's underwear. It wouldn't surprise me, and here's my own hunch. And again, I'm so mindful of his wife and his kids, however many kids. I believe he has at least a son. Yes. And the congregation.
And 2 others.
Right. Yes. This breaks my heart. And if, as a matter of fact, if they'd like to reach out to me, they can reach me at SurvivorSupport.net and, to be able to walk them through, or the congregation. I'd be more than happy to. They could patch me in live, over the internet. So I'm very mindful of what I'm saying. It breaks my heart, this whole thing. But this man fooled so many. But once a man begins to evidence, first of all, cross-dressing, that is the number one, oh, John, there's been cross-dressing. If you guys want to, in this day and age, you want to keep trying to reframe this stuff, no man thinks it's a real proposition. No man thinks it's a reasonable proposition to dress in women's underwear and drag unless he has saturated himself in pornography. Right, ever since the 80s, certainly the 70s, but ever since the internet and pornography. And again, the issue is deviance. Porn and the internet supercharge or fast track that process. And there are stages downward, and it is that twisting process. So the danger sign, real warning signs, are men that are dressing in underwear, because the question is, where did they get that underwear?
Yeah.
If and when they're found out to be stealing women's underwear, now you're in a whole new category. And that's why it's so dangerous for these deviant men to be demanding access to private spaces of women and girls. That means bathrooms, restrooms, locker rooms, shower rooms. Okay, they want access to female sports, not denying women medals and overriding their hard-earned times, the competition times. They don't really care about that. That's just toying with the women. They're doing it to deny women. That's porn-saturated men do that. Porn creates a progressive malevolence in the male mind toward females. That's why the more deviant a man becomes, the more you will see that he starts to put his hand around a woman's throat. He becomes inverted. What they're all about is now gaining access without fear of arrest, because prior to that, they'd be facing 5 to 10 years in prison.
Yeah.
So it's all about gaining access to women to be able to film them, to traumatize them, to ogle them, and to get information about them. And heaven help us what they're doing with that information. And now you've got all this AI-generated porn where they can put faces on bodies, what they're doing to them. And so this is a public safety issue. These men should never be permitted into women's sports, into women's private spaces. They never should be permitted into schools. The LGBTQ is the pedophiles and sexual predators' best gift. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And when you have adults that can't discern that, whether in church or in schools, they are the most useful idiots to these predators. No, none of these men will debate me. Why? Because they know that I know.
Yeah.
Okay, it's all sexual deviance, and it's very dangerous. But when you have a man that's writing this kind of stuff, and there is what's called mortuary porn, that's sex with dead bodies. There's just heinous stuff out there, and all these men that are writing this kind of stuff, they inevitably, Leah Thomas, Sam Britton, they were found with really heinous stuff that has deep malevolence, meaning chopping up women's bodies. They're drawn about this stuff or accessing websites.
Good evening. Welcome into News Leader 9 at 6. I'm Barbara Goche. Jason is off tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Topping our news this evening, the city of Smith Station and communities nearby are mourning the loss of their family member, friend, and Mayor Bubba Copeland. The mayor died in Lee County Friday evening, taking his own life in the midst of controversy surrounding online posts. News 9's East Alabama reporter Justin Brown is live in Smith Station tonight. Justin, I know many people there are still trying to just make sense of this unbelievable loss. Tell us more about what you've been able to find out today.
Yeah, Barbara, a makeshift memorial has been formed outside City Hall here in Smith Station following the passing of Mayor Bubba Copeland. Many are offering condolences, but at least two women that I spoke with say that they're grappling a mix of emotions and they feel that they've been victimized. Flowers and notes of remembrance can be found outside the entrance to Smith Station City Hall on Monday, all in memory of the city's mayor, Bubba Copeland, who took his life on Friday afternoon following a chase involving Lee County Sheriff's deputies. Lee County Sheriff Jay Jones tells us the chase happened after deputies attempted a welfare check.
An attempt was made to pull the vehicle over, get him to stop. There was a pursuit, low speed, a pursuit that lasted for approximately 2 minutes. At the end of that period, he pulled over on the side of the road, exited his vehicle, had a handgun, and at that point he took his life.
The incident happened days after an online report from 1819news.com featuring Copeland shared photos of Copeland dressed as a woman and reports that he featured local women as the subjects of an online fiction. Ainsley Summerlin tells us she was shocked to find out her name and photos had been posted online without her permission.
I had some people start sending me photos that were posted of me on multiple porn sites, I guess you could say, that also had pictures of Brittany as well. And he proceeded to use my first and middle name on these sites. And I believe there are about 9 sites now that I have, 5 or 6 photos of my face and my name across the internet.
A local hairstylist in Smith Station did not want to go on camera, but she tells me her name and likeness was used without her knowledge in an online story she believes was written by Copeland.
It said my first and last name, and it was basically describing the way that I look and then intensified, I guess, as a porn star. And it went into very graphic detail. I didn't get past the first page because I honestly couldn't stomach it.
Lee County Sheriff Jay Jones says the facts and evidence will be given to the Lee County District Attorney, and all the facts will be laid before a grand jury for review.
We're going through our standard process in that investigation. We will gather all the facts available and evidence that we have, and that will be presented to the District Attorney, and a Lee County grand jury will review all of the details of this investigation at a future date.
A public visitation will be held on Wednesday at Vance Brooks Funeral Home in Phoenix City, and the funeral service will be held on Thursday at First Baptist Church of Phoenix City at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. Live in Smith Station, Justin Brown for WTVM News Leader 9.
Yeah, certainly just a heartbreaking story all the way around, Justin. Thank you. And
So this is a public safety issue, and for the states that are voting tomorrow, people need to realize that the Democrat Party, a major plank, supports all of this.
Exactly.
If people care about the protection of women and children, if they care about women's sports, if they care about stopping greedy, unethical doctors from slicing off the breasts of young, troubled mental health patients that aren't getting any health, we call them gender-confused girls, also boys. If you care about stopping these greedy individuals, medical professionals and hospitals from medicalizing and sterilizing and amputating kids, you cannot vote Democrat. Democrats are for all this. They're for deviant men going into women's prisons. These women are being just cell doors are being opened for these deviant predators. 100% of all the men. I know because I worked on site staff. I know the kind of guys that want to get access into female prisons. And 100% of them represent an active threat to these women. So there are so many issues, but the trans deception, the harming kids, and all this, unfortunately, the Democrat and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they all support this.
Exactly. The Commonwealth of Virginia tomorrow will be having an election. And I wanted to do this particular show tonight to let you know that literally a person you could elect to office could take on this particular double life. And you would think the very best of them. Smile, hold a apple pie for them, support them, donate and everything. Philip Hamilton is someone I endorsed over the weekend from the 11th Congressional District, the 11th State Senate District in the Commonwealth, who wants to criminalize the surgical process for transgenders. You need to find men and women like this to vote for, ladies and gentlemen.
In fact, Ken, if you don't mind, here are the states. There are 4 states that are having their general elections tomorrow. And if you want to stand up and protect women's sports, if you want to stand up and protect kids from being groomed in schools, if you want to stand up to these radical school boards that are telling parents to go pound sand that it's their kids, meaning if you want to stand up for parental rights, if you want to stop the medicalization, the exploitation of these kids, the trans deception, if you want to stop deviant men going into libraries and grooming kids, reading to them, if you want to stop single-sex bathrooms, especially in schools, young girls are being assaulted, then in these 4 states, you had better get out and vote because the Democrats have already done early voting. Right? Mississippi, New Jersey, Virginia, Louisiana. You had better get out there. Why? Because the Biden, Kamala Harris, deviant agenda, which is the pro-pedophile agenda, is going to be enforced. If you do not vote for the people that say no more of this, and unfortunately it's the Republicans, and how many Republicans end up betraying us when they get into office, but I'd rather vote for someone who at least says they're going to, right? And then Pennsylvania, you're going to be voting another Supreme Court justice in. So you know, Rachel Levine, the deviant guy that's pushing all this stuff, the Undersecretary of Health, and who's now the Admiral for the Navy or whatever, right? That deviant guy who's still married, by the way, never got a divorce, because I spoke to Uta Hagen, who they went to the same college. And she says nobody knows. The guy technically is still married. He's a father. Rachel Levine, that deviant guy. Okay, so he's from Pennsylvania. He allowed all the older folks that had COVID. You know, he put COVID positive patients back in the rest homes. So Rachel Levine, in my estimation, is a mass murderer.
Yes.
Well, you know, that kind of person, yeah, is going to slice off body parts and be in close with Big Pharma to push this kind of stuff. But Pennsylvania is going to elect a Supreme Court official tomorrow. So Mississippi, New Jersey, Virginia, and Louisiana. If you want to save women's sports, if you want to save young people from being exploited by financial and sexual predators, if you want to save parental rights, you'd better take it seriously and get out. And whether you like it or not, you better vote Republican.
Exactly. En masse. Tonight is your warning. Tonight is your warning from God. En masse, you need to be out and voting tomorrow. Not for you, but for God. You need to make certain that the right people are placed in office. And I do want to say this to a lot of people who are amiss with their biblical doctrinal studies. None of us can lose our salvation. Once saved, we are saved. We are tempted on every side. The only thing that can separate you from God is to refute the Holy Spirit and to deny Christ. That's the only thing. I'm praying right now for his family, that they find the respite that they need, that they turn to Johnuler for the support and counsel and help during this particular time period. Praying for the congregation, that they get in contact with Johnuler for churchprotect.org so that they can repair and heal, and that there are other churches out there that are going through the very same thing, that need to start asking some serious questions about the pastors, whether they're youth pastors or that. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is who has access to your children. That's why the election tomorrow is so important. Who has election access? If you have the opportunity to change it with your vote. But don't vote for the same people who see your children as merely sexual fodder, a plank to play with and toss away. John, I want to thank you so much tonight for being with us and being an encouragement to the family and to the church and to those who are listening and watching. Also via Rumble, you can turn to us in the morning and we will make certain that you have this. But you have got to know that you need to spread this particular message as quickly as you possibly can, because the lie is out there and they're trying to make a pervert a martyr. Give you a final word there, sir.
Yeah, I would echo that. But also, Ken, I want to talk to, if there's any man or woman, but especially the men, if there's any guy that is addicted to pornography right now, I want you to know, number one, compassion and empathy awaits you if you do the right thing. You have to take this seriously. You've got to come out of the dark. Find some guys that you know are healthy and mature, that you can disclose this stuff to, that you can confess. You have to take this seriously. Dave Ramsey talks about gazelle-like intensity when it comes to finances. You have to have gazelle-like intensity when it comes to breaking these strongholds, because this is something that invites very dark stuff. And I am not suggesting this pastor started out, this guy that started out, I'm not suggesting he started out this way. He probably didn't. So you cannot toy with this stuff. And I have a couple tabs on my site. In closing, SurvivorSupport.net, under the Insights tab, Insights 1, there are two parts, Part 1, Part 2, of porn and dark deviance. Start there so you understand how seriously this is. It is a mental, emotional, and spiritual battle that will take you down. No good thing will come from this. So please do not continue to deal with this on your own. Only bad things fester in the dark. So Amen. Find somebody that you can begin to talk to and get a handle on this, and stop all porn and stop masturbation.
And mothers, all those porn books under your kid's bed, you think is cute, making him a man, you're destroying him. Take the porn and burn it. Have him burn it too. You want him to have a good life. Ladies and gentlemen, Johnuler, thank you, sir, for spending time with us on this particular important night. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, who you vote for will make a big difference tomorrow. We'll see you in just a few minutes with Janice Hall, the J Hall World Report, ladies and gentlemen, right after these messages.